And so that's when you get the argumentative. That's when you get the you're wrong. That's when you get the sort of
statement, prove me wrong, period.
Yes, exactly. Yep.
Hey, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And you can probably hear, I think I'm getting like a little bit of a cold or something in my throat. It sounds deep and resonant.
Yeah.
Which I kind of like.
We always like it when we get sick because we think it makes us better podcasters.
Yeah. I'm always like, oh, it sounds so raspy and interesting.
That's right.
It's not just that like normal voice. It's got some qualitative nature to it. Anyway, we are in the middle of a short series here on the podcast, here at Personality Hacker. This is episode 3 out of 4 podcasts that we've been on this series. We're talking about the energies of what's called the Jungian cognitive functions. And we're talking about them having different expressions in personality, either a analytic or assertive focused expression, or more of a holistic, receptive, diffused expression. Now, we talk about this initially to compare and contrast just those energies in general before we even apply it to personality type, Antonia. We've been talking about this in general. So I want to apply it toward the thinking functions today. But before we do that, before you apply this idea to thinking, let's just talk about analytic or holistic energy in general. So almost imagine yourself, if you're listening along or watching along, just imagine yourself as just two, like type A or type B person, right? Not in the classical version, but like holistic style person or analytic style person. Which one are you? As we describe some of the qualities of analytic energy versus holistic energy, how does this show up for you? Which one do you think you lean more toward?
Yes, let's go through a compare contrast of those two energies, the analytic and the holistic. But just in case somebody's coming in midstream and needs a little bit more context, we are talking, like you mentioned, the Jungian cognitive functions. If you're new to type, these are the building blocks of how type works. These are the mental processes that we all use. And our personality type lets us know which ones we favor. And there are 8, as described by Carl Jung in the book Psychological Types. And the really interesting
This is what
information.
Myers-Briggs is based on, basically, is what you're saying.
You got it.
Yeah.
And the really interesting information that has come out very recently by our friend and colleague, Dr. Dario Nardi, is that each one of these 8 cognitive functions has an either analytic energy or a holistic energy associated with it. And as you basically, I mean, I don't know if you implied it, I inferred it by what you said, is that analytic and holistic energies are all by themselves preferences we have, right?
Yeah.
All by themselves. They come with their own qualities and character traits. And then when we take one of these two energies and marry it with a function, now that function, I call it an alchemical response. That function now takes on certain qualities and characteristics unique to it with its either analytic or holistic preference.
Yeah.
So it doesn't change the function. It just focuses on one aspect or like a certain aspect of that function.
Yeah, and just so if you're a new listener or somebody that's uninitiated, Antonia went right into functions and talking about the technical stuff. It's a little deeper. In fact, this episode is going to be a little bit more advanced. If you're like, what is she talking about? Function this? What? Head over to personalityhacker.com. Look up something called the CAR model. It'll explain how these look for personality type. And then you have a specific CAR model for your personality type, which shows you the preferred way that you learn information and make decisions. That's what your 4-letter code basically like points to.
Right.
Are these functions, these mental processes that you use.
Right. So we're going to make the assumption you've done that.
Yep.
And if you want a more detailed conversation around this next element we're talking about, which is the analytic and holistic energies.
Yeah.
You can go listen to the first of this series and it will explain some of that. Basically do a bit of a deeper dive into the compare contrast between these two things. But in this episode, like you mentioned, we're going to talk about the thinking functions. And so we're going to marry these analytic or holistic energies and the character traits that come with it to extroverted thinking or effectiveness, what we call effectiveness, and introverted thinking or what we call accuracy.
Yeah.
So let's first do a quick compare contrast, not a deep dive one, but just kind of a compare contrast on some of the qualities and characteristics between these two, just in case you need a refresher.
In general, again, as you as a person listening or watching along, which one of these do you think in general, overall, your entire system, which one do you lean toward?
Right. So analytic is a more goal-focused function or energy. It's looking for a specific outcome. It's driven towards that outcome, and it tends to be a little more confident and have a lot of clarity about what it wants. And holistic is more open-ended. It's more seeking input and reflecting. It doesn't have a lot of clarity necessarily about an outcome and what it wants, but it also is more patient. Tends to be more curious and is a part of the flow of a process as opposed to the end game. Analytic is also more top-down in situations. And holistic is more bottom-up in situations. Analytic is more visual and wants things fast. Holistic tends to be more auditory and more narrative-focused and a little slower of a process. Analytic is also a more literal thinker, whereas a holistic approach is a more figurative style of thinking. And analytic styles tend to be more comfortable in hierarchies, whereas holistics are more egalitarian.
Yeah.
So that's like a quick compare contrast.
And so we're going to take these energies and we're going to apply them to the cognitive functions. Now, this is episode 3 in this 4-part series. The first 2 episodes, we talked about the 4 what's called perceiving cognitive functions. These are the ways that we perceive our world. We learn information, we take in the world. And so, that could be just difference of worldview, difference of things. But today we're going to switch to 2 of the 4 functions that are technically called judging functions. What that means is these are part of the evaluative criteria, the way we make decisions in the world. We have like thoughts about these things. Like we have like we own how we feel about these or think about these. We have decisions. Like there's disagreements that will come up, because we're pretty sure that this decision needs to be made in this way. And so often, this is where the fights can happen, right? This is where the disagreements can happen. This is where we start doing, that's not how that is, Antonia or Joel. It works this way. It's because we're talking about something that's very judicious in our lives.
Yeah. When you say we, you mean humans.
Humans, yes.
Right.
I don't mean just you and me.
Right. It's like, well, we have opinions on the judging functions. You mean like, no, humans.
No, we all have opinions on the judging, like from that part of ourselves.
Yeah, we call it the shouldness of the world,
yeah.
Right? It's like how things should be. And so we tend to stand by our shoulds, right? And it's like, that's not how it should be. And that's the judging functions that are the backers of the shoulds.
So I would say that if you feel like, wait a second, that can't be it. Well, hang tight, because we're going to explain some of this. But you also might want to come over and be part of our personality quests, because every week we gather with a tribe of like minds, just like you, geeking out about personal growth type, but also how to make it real in our lives, apply it. I'd love for you to be part of this, because I think if you come and you experience the podcast and then right afterward get to talk about, ask questions around, and unpack some of the key concepts, even if you're new and you're like, what is going on? I think it'll become very clear in that quest experience. So Personality Quest, go over to personalityhacker.com/quest. I would love for you to be part of this week's quest coming up to discuss some of the concepts around this. And let's just jump right into the thinking processes now.
Okay. So like you mentioned, we've already done the sensing functions in the first podcast and the intuitive functions in the second podcast. And now we're moving into the judging functions. And what makes this a little more challenging is... And we've already talked about how analytic can sound more extroverted and holistic can sound more introverted, but it's not. That doesn't track. We've also talked about how it's not that thinkers favor analytic and feelers favor holistic. And we've talked about all the different configurations and why understanding these flavors can be very helpful in helping determine your best fit type and not doing mistypes and learning really valuable lessons and taking in more territory about how all of these functions work. But the challenge when we get to the thinking functions is that particularly extroverted thinking, but both extroverted thinking effectiveness and introverted thinking accuracy kind of sound analytic just in themselves.
In the way they're described.
Yes, exactly. Or just how we see them. So it's gonna take a little bit extra of a pull to really understand the difference between analytic and holistic, particularly extroverted thinking or effectiveness. So I'm going to do my best to try to create this distinction.
This also comes from Dr. Dario Nardi's work. It's his new book we're pulling this from. Some of the material.
Thank you.
I just realized we need to mention that too.
We do.
What is the name of that book?
Decode Your Personality, 64 brain-based subtypes to go beyond Myers-Briggs.
So it's Dr. Nardi's work. He's also pulled on the work of Dr. Viktor Glenko, who also works with socionics in Europe, but he's done some work around subtypes. In fact, some of the names are used with Victor's permission. Dario also tunes into Dr. Helen Fisher's work around neurotransmitters
and hormones,
and also his own work with EEG brain imaging.
Right.
So he can see which subtype or which parts of the brain or which flavor of analytic holistic show up on the brain scans for people.
Yeah. Well, it was the confusion around all of that stuff. Right. Why were these all showing up differently? It was the confusion around it that led to this work.
So this isn't just made up out of thin air. This comes from a lot of research and a synthesis of a lot of things that are, I guess being talked about in different areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Okay. So all of that said, let's go into extroverted thinking or effectiveness. So we've been saying it throughout the podcast, even though this is the preferred function of TJs in the Myers-Briggs system. All of us use extroverted thinking or effectiveness. It just depends on where it falls. And as we have also mentioned in previous podcasts, the higher up a function is for you, the more preferred it is for you, the more likely you are to be able to dip into both of the energies. So if you hear a description of these functions and you go, I think I do both of them, is that possible? The answer is yes. In fact, it's what we want to do. We want to use both sides. And when we develop both sides, both the analytic and the holistic versions or flavorings, they end up creating a very mature version of the function. So it's ideal. It is our goal to use both sides. If we're only able to access one side or the other, that is a form of one-sidedness, and it usually is obvious. It comes up a lot. So if this is one of your preferred functions, self-identifying which side you tend to prefer or like better, the analytic or the holistic version, take note of that and see what you can do to help develop the other side of it, because that's we'll make a case for why a balance of that is important for really maturing the function and getting the most out of it. Okay. All right. So that's all the preamble. Let's get into extroverted thinking. All right. So as
There's
mentioned
a lot
before,
of preamble.
It was so much preamble.
It feels like incredible amounts of preamble for all of that.
Well, I think the reason why we have so much preamble right now is it's a series that we don't know if somebody's coming in the midstream.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, so we have to talk to both the person who has been following us and the person who's like just here for this one episode. So it's hard to go, okay, what are all the things that we have to say every episode? All right. Yeah. Okay. But that's
we did
done.
it. We're done. We did good. Hey, fist bump. Good job.
Right. The first bookend is complete. Let's now get into the material.
Yeah.
All right. So as mentioned before, one of the challenges with this function is that it already looks analytical.
Yeah.
Right. Or analytic. Extroverted thinking or effectiveness does. But Dario says, instead of thinking of it as already analytical, think of it more in terms of empirical and also effective. Right. Mm-hmm. It's a function that is trying to make things happen. It's already goal oriented, but its desire is progress and impact. And getting to the end of something as a general rule in the best way possible. How do we make things happen? So the analytic version of extroverted thinking is almost like that on crack, right? Yeah. Dario calls it the manager type or the manager flavor. So take all of that assertive, confident, right, like pushing energy out, being very goal focused and oriented and really pushing and driving towards that and being top down and more leadership oriented. Like take all of that energy and then apply it to something that already has a tendency to go that direction. And now you've got like the nth degree of it. Yeah. Right. And I think that that's sort of the way that I'm understanding the combination of these two energies. So what does that look like? It looks like being really committed to main goals and sub goals. Right. It's like a true commitment to making things happen. And it can get really specific, right, of the thing that it's trying to make happen. It's also a person who has no problem directing others. This is that leadership component of extroverted thinking or effectiveness. It's usually the analytic version that is really pushing not just the self and not just driven on one's own, but also like recruiting others to get in there and get all these energies towards one thing that's big. And that's one of the reasons why analytic extroverted thinking or effectiveness, particularly when it's given the right resources, can make extraordinarily big things happen. It's the combination of these energies that are already, sort of like they're already kind of that way anyway. And so now it's an exponential of that. It can feel a little bulldozing.
Yeah.
Because it is so focused. It's very focused also on the business of living. That's how Dario describes it, the business of living. So it's like a business mindset applied to almost everything. And an actual business, that's obvious, right? And he mentions just like a company can go bankrupt, it's also seeing everything else as being able to go bankrupt. Like people can go bankrupt. They can be morally, emotionally, socially, or physically bankrupt. And so it's a desire to manage and drive themselves and others and utilize all these resources to get things done towards fixed goals with that business mindset, focused on consequences, focused on contingency plans, really strongly confident around ideas. And these are the people who are usually very good at explaining things.
Yeah.
Yeah. He mentions that they are almost always the people who talk confidently and break things down and explain things so that other people can understand them. But one should not mistake it for accuracy, since the data and analysis is often second or third hand. So it's not introverted thinking or accuracy. It is definitely distinctive from it, but it is a function that's usually very good at explaining and breaking things down. And that also makes it highly desirable for leadership.
Yeah. So simplification, sometimes oversimplification is most likely. And what I also hear in this is applying metrics to everything, KPIs, key performance indicators, even to things like your romantic relationship. Like probably seeing it through the lens of like, okay, how well is that being measured? How well is it going in this like very thinker way? Like it doesn't matter what it is. It's trying to almost, if I don't have a measurement, I'll make one up and apply it. That's how much I need to measure everything toward the progress that I want as the outcome.
Yep. Relying on heuristics and formulas for almost everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
And so there's a lot to be said, a lot of positive to be said about somebody who uses analytic extroverted thinking. I mean, I kind of feel like these are some of the people who make the world go round, right? They get things done, and we see evidence of it all over the place. But some of the challenges is that I thought this was a very interesting way of communicating it. The telltale sign of an analytic version of extroverted thinking is that the users sort on empirical factors such as speed, usefulness, profit, and accuracy, but tend to really prioritize speed and profit. It can bulldoze and even deliberately build in suffering and failure structurally. There's easily an efficient inhumanity to it. So I think this is when people find that portion off-putting, this is where we get stereotypes around TJs.
Yeah.
Is that they're seeing this function highly analytic without any holistic influence in it. And some other types can take exception to that.
Yeah. I think the good example of that is Vietnam War. Robert McNamara. Robert McNamara and some of the other powers that be in the Pentagon don't have a measurement for who's winning the war. So they just start to decide, well, we'll just do body count. If did our side kill more of them than their side killed of us, and we'll report it on the nightly news. My mom tells stories about literally on the nightly news, they're giving body count reports on how well we're doing in the war, completely ignoring the fact that these are human lives being lost, as if, oh, these are just numbers, these are percentages, that's all we're looking at here, but those are real people. Right. And so I think you can lose sight of some of the real suffering of human in that whole system that's running.
Yeah, that would be a really imbalanced, one-sided version of analytic extroverted thinking.
Yeah.
And it can get pretty bad, just like all of them can. I mean, once we start talking about the judging functions, whenever it's one-sided, I mean, you even saw that to some extent with the perceiving functions, right? Tunnel vision for analytic introverted intuition, laziness for the holistic version, right?
Yeah.
Over promotion for the analytic extroverted intuition, that kind of thing. So, all the one-sided components can have something sort of like not very nice things attached to them. And I think this is the first example we have of the judging functions on it. But I think all of them, when they're one-sided, can lead to very bad things. And this would be this version. Okay, so what's the holistic version?
Yeah.
How does one balance themselves out?
Well, can there be a holistic version? I mean,
Right?
we think of extroverted thinking effectiveness just so one-sided like that, with one note. People probably have a hard time even imagining what could it mean? What could it even look like holistic? What would that be?
Yeah, well, and I think some people who use a holistic version of extroverted thinking have mistyped themselves. I think that's not uncommon. And sometimes is maybe extroverted feeling. Okay, so again, the holistic version is more receptive. It's more flexible. It's taking in a bigger territory, as we've talked about before. It's like that Shambhala meditation, as we mentioned in other podcasts, where you see a more periphery, but you don't see anything necessarily really in focus like you do with the analytic. So it shows up on all the small things in a person's life. It's more about the task level attention to detail. It's wanting to do things well. It's not just wanting an outcome, but it wants a good outcome. It wants to do it more of a craftsman. And so it doesn't have as much insistence on, like you said, KPIs on everything. It's more about like how well are things being done.
So it's more about quality than results.
Yes, exactly.
Like the quality matters. How we get the results matters just as much as the results matter.
Yes. Yeah.
Process, quality, putting the time, like the artistry, the artisan nature of it, the craftsmanship of something.
Yes. And facts, figures, charts, and diagrams, all of those things are just as important, but it also comes with restraint, thriftiness, a responsibility to fulfill tasks. It comes with a little bit more of a sense of like a duty to it, as opposed to a person using extroverted thinking to make something happen. It's more like being used by extroverted thinking. It's almost like they're submissive to the function, right? And that they're responsible to the function and responsible for making things happen. And so there's more of a focus on being duty oriented towards making this end game. Not just get it done, but also be like,
do it well.
Do it well, and do it within a certain time frame, and make sure we didn't spend too much money on it, and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Well, and I would also say maybe in here too, we could inject this idea of, if you want to go fast, go alone. That might be more of like the analytic extroverted thinking or effectiveness. If you want to go far, go together. There's probably also more opening to working, with larger teams, letting other people share their metrics and what their addition is to the experience. In other words, there's a little bit more of like, maybe there's a bigger picture being taken into of what could be accomplished as well.
Yep.
On a longer timeline.
Yeah. And it can be applied to anything, like all this idea of like, it doesn't have to be like spreadsheets and accounting forms. It can be like writing songs or music, right? It can be any project they throw themselves into. They want to make sure that it's quality. They want to make sure that they're doing it well. And there is a sense of like, if we need to do it in groups, that's fine. Again, the holistic version tends to be bottom up. It's less, and it's more egalitarian. So it doesn't step into those positions of leadership as quickly. If they're going to be responsible for something big, they actually might end up going it alone a little bit, like doing it more on their own. And that might be one of the reasons why a person with this holistic extroverted thinking might mistype themselves as a different type.
Yeah.
Because they are more comfortable doing those kinds of things alone. But if they are going to go far and go together, it's going to be a little bit more egalitarian, a little less top down. That said, they're still extroverted thinking. So it's all boxes and procedures all the way, right? And that includes in relationships. So they're still going to, manage relationships like they manage everything else. There's going to be a sense of craftsmanship and process and procedures and boxes and, right ways of doing things. And so the downside to this is, as Dario mentions, it can get out of hand as pedantic, fastidious, compulsive around facts, details, and order. So this is the extroverted thinking that is not a slapdash and go and hungry hippo. This is the one that wants control and make sure that everything's done right and might control people to make sure that things are done right. It might be, it's not necessarily this kumbaya version. It's more paying attention to the little things as opposed to just the big things. And there's a certain order to how those things get done. And that includes in relationships, and we do it right.
Yeah.
He mentions that if you think of the definition of holistic, he says you could picture it as quietly crafting a fine watch under moonlight, which is kind of it's like a romantic way of looking at it, but you can see that the craftsmanship that goes into a watch, the doing it even at night in the moonlight where you're still trying to make it happen in a certain timely manner. It's a real focus on the end game, but the process that gets you there.
When you say watchmaking, for some reason, it makes me think of Switzerland and Germany. And the moment I think of Germany, I think, man, that's a country that really embodies, I believe, extroverted thinking. And I'm like, but United States embodies extroverted thinking as well, effectiveness. And then I went, oh my goodness. Germany and US might be a great compare and contrast. Germany's got more of that craftsman, do it right. You go to Germany and all their systems are perfect and designed really well. You come to the United States, we have some pretty good systems. They're a little slapdash, but we move way faster and we have bigger things and we produce way more. We're much more analytically focused with our general energy of extroverted thinking or effectiveness. But Germany's more craftsman around it.
Yes.
But that's still the same energy.
I think that's a great example. And I mean, what I know of Germany, I've only been once, but
same here.
Yeah. But it did seem like it was pretty, it was sort of crazy. We got out of the airplane and went down this tube where there was at least 3 different people ensuring that we know exactly where to go, even though there was only really one place to go. And when we left the tube that was leading us out of the terminal, a bus had driven up and the person had parked the doors, the open doors lined up outside the tube. And
it was
so
absurd.
Just walk straight on. And it was it was just crazy. So yes, I think that the United States would have a more analytic extroverted thinking effectiveness bent, and Germany would have a more holistic extroverted thinking.
Again, I'm sure Germans are like, that's not true. It's totally different. But
please correct us, Germans.
My experience of Germany.
That's right. That's what it feels like.
For the purposes of this podcast, let's assume I'm right.
That's right. Let's just pretend. So exactly. There's Dario says they maintain a practical, predictable, and somewhat impersonal kind of integrity.
Yeah.
All right. To just make it happen and make it done well. It's the receptive quality is in this. The person is subordinating extroverted thinking or effectiveness in service of something else. So I would say that they're kind of being used by it, but actually what they're doing is they're harnessing this function in behalf of something else, as opposed to it almost being the goal, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And
a means to an end.
Yeah. When it comes to factors like speed, profit, usefulness, and accuracy, this user is prioritizing usefulness and accuracy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
it could almost look like introverted thinking at times, I'm guessing.
It's
less productive. It's more precision focused.
Yep.
And so mistypes could happen here potentially.
I suspect when extroverted thinking users or effectiveness users think they're TP types, it's because they're using the holistic version.
Yeah.
Right. But when you bring them together, you end up having both the ability to make big things happen and having that sort of aggression or assertion for big goals and leadership and explaining and all of that, while at the same time being able to have your mind on or your eye on resource and make sure there's a practicality to it and a frugalness to it, not just an ability to gain resource and have power or money or whatever, but also something that people are going to be able to use and that has a sense of integrity about it. And, there's like a good marriage there. If a person doesn't have enough holistic extroverted thinking or effectiveness, like we said, like any measurement will do, including body count. So that holistic comes in to go, well, that's not okay. Like, that's not right. That's not useful, right? The process is as important as the end game. So you've got to have some of that holistic in there as well. Whereas when you're overly holistic extroverted thinking or effectiveness, that's when you get a little too rigid. Like, there's a rigidity and it has to be done this way. And like, there's a control and like putting people into kind of like the boxes of usefulness. And the analytic can come in and go, done is better than perfect.
Yeah.
Right? Like, just make it happen. It's okay. You can let go of some of the control over it. You can let go of some of the precision of it. And I think it's the analytic users that are better at communicating and explaining. And holistic extroverted thinking can use some of that. It can use some of that ability to communicate more effectively.
And I think that we, at least here in the United States, need more of the holistic extroverted thinking. And you, if you're listening and you're super analytic focused as an extroverted thinking user, TJ, man, could you lean into the holistic? It would certainly get me non-plastic products that break 3 months after I buy them.
Right.
It drives me crazy. It's like, yeah, you got the product created, but it's garbage. There's no craftsmanship. It doesn't work after a while. It breaks. It's cheaply made.
Right.
We have no craftsmanship anymore in our manufacturing or our production or things. Like, it's really going away. And I think that energy is missing.
Right.
Whereas the Swiss watch is that elegant design and craftsmanship that I love so much.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So a combination of these two things is how high quality things are made and created to scale.
Yeah.
Right. And the analytic is self-driving. The holistic usually allows other things to drive.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of reason to have both sides of this to balance it out a little bit.
Let's switch over to introverted thinking, or what we've nicknamed accuracy.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about the holistic analytic version of this.
Okay. So the way that Dario describes analytic introverted thinking makes it sound like the worst person in the world. But I'm realizing
that tracks.
Yeah.
I'm teasing. I'm kidding.
Well, and this is unsurprising.
These are the people online that are bitching about the TPs in their life. Like, this person is, it's not introverted thinking.
No.
It's probably a very analytical, probably a young person or less mature person, even if they're older, using a very analytic version of it that causes everybody their trauma.
Yep.
Right. And gets the person using it in trouble all the time.
Yep, exactly. Okay, so what is introverted thinking all by itself?
Sure.
Introverted thinking or accuracy is the function that wants things to be logically consistent, is doing their own research on about nearly everything, wants expertise, wants things to make sense, and is looking for models and systems to be able to, like mental models and systems to be able to plug things into. Precision is important. Accuracy is important. Whether or not the model is entirely mental, it can be a physical model as well. But the precision part is important. And attention to precision detail is important too. Okay. So what does it look like when it's analytic? Well, if it's overly analytic, right? And I think Dario, unsurprisingly, has a little bit of a, when he's describing this, is a little bit of bias towards the one-sided version. But he calls the analytic introverted thinking or accuracy the critic. And this
we
is
could say the calibrator.
This is a stubborn person.
That would soften it up a bit, wouldn't
I don't
it?
think it would, and I don't think that's helpful. I think I remember
It really is the critic.
I remember being this person, and
it really is.
I think the person is obnoxious. And this was me. So but there's good things that come with it. So hang tight and you'll hear all the good things that come along with it. This is a person who wants to provide expert guidance, and so therefore is an expert, right? And wants expertise as much as humanly possible. The challenge is that usually it's based on like one or two mental models of the world. So I remember being this version of introverted thinking or accuracy when I was younger, when I was religious. Everything had to filter through the mental model of my religion. And when an analytic introverted thinking or accuracy user is too one-sided, it means like almost a wholesale rejection of anything that does not match one's mental model. If it doesn't make sense to me, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And so that's when you get the argumentative. That's when you get the you're wrong. That's when you get the sort of
statement, prove me wrong, period.
Yes, exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
It's really it's a function that when it's overly analytic lacks modesty and humility. Really, it's like it has a hard time inputting information that doesn't already track, and there's not enough, questioning of self. By the same token, and of course, there's a desire to correct errors, right, and a desire to be helpful in that way.
Well, and a ton of good things of like highly functional, output that's very precise and accurate.
Yep.
I mean, I want an analytic, introverted thinking, accuracy person to be my brain surgeon.
Yep.
I don't want them to be open and like have optionality. I want them to have expert subject matter in what they're doing. I want them to be highly trained and skilled. I want them to bring everything into that mental model and, operate on my brain properly and do it well.
Yep. And
so there's a lot of benefit here.
And that's what they do. They act as reliable experts in a particular discipline and bring a lot of active problem-solving power. And so it's usually the more analytic version of this function that is successful in life, right? They bring all that wattage, all that expertise, all that that desire to understand and know and fit it into the model. They bring that to various circumstances and situations. And so they usually end up being or can become quite successful because they're focusing all that wattage in a specific direction. And remember, it's driven, it's analytic. It's like, it's bringing this to end games and goals. The challenge is that it's hard to listen if you're bringing everything into your mental model. And so
it's on your turf, your terms.
Yeah.
So if something lives outside of the framework you've drawn and all the data that floats inside of that, you just might disregard it, not even see it, be ambivalent toward it, however that looks.
Or reject it wholesale because it doesn't fit into your model.
Yeah.
Right. And so so the challenge is hearing other people and not asking how it's fitting into their mental model. It's whether or not it fits into your mental models. And if it doesn't, then prove me, it's like you said, prove me wrong or whatever. It's like, well, either I reject it or I think it's dumb, or you have to explain how it fits in my model. And if you can't, then why would I listen? Right. There's a stubbornness there. On the plus side, what that also means is it's very hard for people who have analytic, introverted thinking or accuracy to fall for groupthink. And that's probably one of the most important components of this is that they are not easily misled. They do not fall for other people's BS. When everybody else is like, the sky is falling or whatever, like whenever groupthink and echo chambers form, these are not people who enter them, right? They might start an echo chamber because they find it funny, but they're not going to be somebody who's easily duped necessarily. They're going to do their own research and they're going to think for themselves and they're going to make sure that whatever they define precision as, they've got it when it comes to, their perspective of the world and reality. And so they tend to be successful. They tend to be hard to dupe. They tend to be experts in their field. And they also come across harsh and they can be quite argumentative and people can have a hard time with them. They can really struggle socially.
I also just want to make a mention here that we've drifted a little bit to talking specifically about people that carry this, that have it in their personality. All of us have these functions in us, not just TP types that have accuracy, introverted thinking. And all of us have extroverted thinking or effectiveness, not just TJ types.
Yep.
I want to make that comment because as you listen along, part of you has an accuracy part, right? And there's an introverted thinking part of you that might have a bend toward being more analytic or more holistic, but it may not be your strength. You may not be a TP. This might be down in your shadow, and yet you still might be finding yourself in weird moments being argumentative and making people fit things in your mental framework. And all the characteristics you're talking about here, that somebody higher up does it more in a more sophisticated way. You listening along might still find yourself leaning one way or the other.
Well, I think we've all run into somebody's analytic, introverted thinking at one time or the other.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Every English teacher ever.
Yeah. Well,
correcting my papers as a kid.
yeah, or you get into a political conversation or religious conversation with somebody and you run into the analytic introverted thinking and you're like, I see everything has to fit into your mental model. I understand now, right?
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, then it's wholesale rejected. Yeah, exactly. And so you're totally right. And when we have a preference for one side or the other, and it's not a function that is preferred, like it's not high up, it's way low down. That's that moment. That's that moment when you're arguing for something that you may or may not be right about, right?
Yeah.
And you'll go to your grave with it. So so those are that's the good and the bad of the analytic version. Let's move on to the holistic version. The holistic version of introverted thinking, Dario calls the systemist. And this is a lot more open framed. There's not one mental model or two mental models. There's like a gajillion mental models. And that's part of that open frame, right? The seeing a bunch of different things. And so so the advantage to this is to be able to come in and out of mental models quickly.
I just want to, again, mental models, this makes sense to a TP, an introverted thinking accuracy user, but I'm just going to do some translation here for people that are like me. They're like, if I didn't know what a mental model is, I'd be like, what is she talking about?
Please do.
Things like Myers-Briggs is a mental model. We can organize our understanding of people using a system with a 4-letter code and 8 cognitive functions. The Enneagram system is another mental model to organize people both by personality type, but also by levels of development. There's another system. Socionics is a mental model, right? The old temperaments of sanguine, phlegmatic, that's a mental model. Kierkegaard's temperaments is a mental model. So I'm just mentioning these in personality type.
Yeah.
The generational theory is a mental model. And so each of these is a way to organize and hang information, to sort it and understand it. You use the meta model or the mental model as all this input comes in to sort and organize this information.
Right.
And so what you're saying is that this holistic introverted thinking accuracy isn't just locked into one model. Let's say, I just love Myers-Briggs and I don't even care about the Enneagram. Everything has to fit in a Myers-Briggs framework. Mm-hmm. You're saying that this type of a person or this energy for this function would have multiple models. Let's just take personality type that they're weaving and flowing and moving in and out of and sorting it based on what makes sense for the model and the information at hand.
Right. Well, and those are nice neutral ones, but also a religion would be a mental model.
Sure.
Right. Or a political affiliation would be a mental model.
Correct.
And so
philosophy.
Right, exactly. And so if somebody is aligned with a particular, say, political party, then everything has to be filtered through. So everything has to make sense according to that political affiliation.
So it's assumptive level thinking. You're almost buying the assumption first, and then you're finding how things fit into that assumption or not.
Yes. And one of the ways to temper a more analytic introverted thinking is to question one's assumptions.
Yeah.
Like that's the point of holistic introverted thinking, is to question one's assumptions. And so when you question your assumptions and you're questioning your premises all the time, not a lot hold up. And so instead of having one or two that you're relying on and filtering everything through, you end up having a whole bunch and none of them are particularly reliable. They're just all sort of layered on top of each other, which is why it's a more systemist approach. And so there's a lot of value to that, right? There's a capacity to, sort of see things at multiple different layers. Dario uses the example of, like, in the humanities, you've got the individual psychology of a person, and then you've got where they fit in their family structure and their family system. And then you've got where they fit in their cultural system. And then you've got where they fit sort of globally. And there's all these different layers of where a person fits. And there's a ton of models that come in. Like if I look at individual psychology, there's like probably a dozen different models I use on that one. And then when I look at family systems, there's a couple solid models. And when I look at cultural systems, I've got like probably a dozen more cultural, and so it's like every piece of information is just being filtered through all these different models and all these different ways of looking at it and trying to find order in all that chaos, right? Because it gets real complex real quick. The disadvantage is that people who have a more holistic introverted thinking have a very hard time being motivated towards anything ever, right? Because nothing is particularly persuasive.
Yeah.
Right? Everything is just a model. And so it's hard to be driven towards anything. It's hard to have a goal. it's really easy to get overwhelmed by all the data and the information. It's like, well, if I look at it this way, it's this thing. But if I look at it this way, if I put it through this model and blah, 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 and then it's just hard to know what to do ever. And so the massive downfall of holistic introverted thinking or accuracy is it's almost like a malaise, right? It's not like an emotional malaise. It's just kind of like everything's absurd. So what do I do now, right?
So if you're a TP person that maybe struggles with motivation, I mean, the immediate takeaway is you could probably lean into more of a analytic expression of your introverted thinking or accuracy process.
Yeah,
Try to exercise that more.
Mm-hmm.
And that might help you with motivation, clarity, focus, goal setting, the things maybe you want in life to go toward.
Well, and the first way that Dario describes analytic introverted thinking or accuracy is stubborn on principles.
Yeah.
There's a stubbornness to it.
Yeah.
That's very beneficial to people who favor holistic introverted thinking or accuracy because there's no stubbornness there. There's just another way of seeing something.
Yeah.
Right? There's just like another way of looking at it. Or not from different perspectives, but from different mental models, from different systems and different ways of looking at things.
You're taking the same data and running it through multiple different, almost like sorting on a spreadsheet. I've got the same data, but I'm organizing it in different columns and I'm running different reports based on that same numbers. I'm getting different results based on how I run the report or what I'm looking for in the data.
Yes, exactly.
And so a holistic introverted thinking or accuracy user is doing that more than the analytic.
Yeah, way more. In fact, almost compulsively. And so the other piece is they oftentimes lack expertise. Unlike the analytic introverted thinking that usually has high expertise, holistic introverted thinking or accuracy usually lacks it.
Yeah.
Because what are you going to be an expert in? You'd have to choose, right? You'd have to decide. And so the nice thing is all of the complexity of thought. The bad thing is that's all you get, right? There's nothing else. And there's a lot of diminishing returns on how far that will get you. So you can tell that I, at this point, favor or seem to favor more of a holistic introverted thinking or accuracy frame, because part of the reason why we do this podcast is because I just love mental models and I like introducing new ones all the time.
And learning them yourself.
And learning them myself and talking about them and, unearthing new information. And what if I look at it through this system? So the podcast has been basically in part me wanting to talk, and you as well, but speaking about my introverted thinking.
Of course.
Me wanting to talk about all these different models that I get excited about. But I grew up in a religion that taught me to be analytic introverted thinking. It was the only thing I could be analytic about and get away with it. And so I grew up very analytic introverted thinking. That's one of the reasons why I frequently say I grew up kind of a dick. Is what I'm really saying is that I grew up stubborn and argumentative and everything had to fit into my frame. Otherwise, I immediately rejected it and I was not nice about it either.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I think that I've really come to recognize, particularly in reading Dario's work, is the benefit of marrying those two things together. Because even though I like to hop around to different mental models, there's still a very specific mental model that we primarily use here, which is Myers-Briggs. And so my expertise is in Myers-Briggs. My expertise is not in the Enneagram. I never say that it is, right? I know it enough to get by, but I never think I'm an expert in it. My expertise is not in spiral dynamics. I love the model. I would never say I'm an expert in it, right? Like I will very happily acknowledge I'm not an expert in most of these models. I'm getting more and more closer in generational theory, but I'm still not an expert. But I feel pretty confident in saying I'm an expert in Myers-Briggs at this point. And especially since I've been using it in coaching for so long. And so
when you have to apply something, not in just only in your own life, but give people advice that could really mess their lives up if it's not good advice.
Right.
The stakes are extremely high. You better know what you're doing. Yeah,
exactly. Right. You could take other people and yourself can take a real hit in that context.
Yeah.
And so, that's what Dario recommends one does. If you're using introverted thinking or accuracy as a preferred function, what you're trying to look for is a sweet spot of expertise in something, but not having to filter everything through it. Like, if I had to let go of Myers-Briggs, I could do that. I could let it go. And you're never allowed to think about that ever again. We're going to eternal sunshine of the spotless mind you, and we're just going to remove Myers-Briggs from your database. And it'd be like, okay, that's probably pretty inconvenient because I have an entire life that's built on it. But all right, I'll probably figure it out. So it's an ability to build expertise in something and to be good at it and to have goals around it without being so married to it that everybody has to engage with you on those terms. And having an ability to question the premise and having some humility and modesty. That's the sweet spot. And that's what I'm always like. It's not an easy balance to do. And I'm always striving for that. That's my goal, right? Yeah. Whether or not I accomplish it at any given moment, because I can tell myself, I can tell my holistic days and I can tell my analytic days. My analytic days, I'm a bit of a dick and I'm threatened by other people. My holistic days, I'm kind of a bit of a mess and I have a lot of brain fog and I'm not sure what I'm supposed to be doing. But when I do get it right and I get into the center, I'm like, okay, that's right. That's the really good balance. And I think it's the one I've gotten the closest to balancing. So it's my model for what all the other functions in balance can look like, how nice they can be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there more to say about the holistic, or are we ready to start wrapping up?
I do want to say something that I thought was really interesting. Maybe it was just interesting to me because I do use this function. And I'm glad you once again reiterated that all of us use this function. All of us use extroverted thinking or effectiveness. So this is relevant to everybody, and which side do you use and how can you balance them out? I think is still a really important question. But for anybody who has this as a preferred function, I just thought this was really interesting. I want to read it directly from his writing. The two flavors respond to stress differently. So analytic introverted thinking and holistic introverted thinking respond to stress differently. Analytic introverted thinking or accuracy tends to cause caustic humor and argue when feeling threatened or not taken seriously. They'll be quick to reply with rhetorical tricks, change the goalpost of an argument, and so on to maintain a sense of superiority. In particular, reflex kicks in. Until a foreign idea is validated on their terms, it is harshly judged as false. In contrast, holistic introverted thinking users or accuracy users tend to disintegrate under stress. I'm like, holy crap, that's me right now. They're already juggling many different models, definitions, ideas, and so on. It's a messy web. Then when stressed, they might get clumsy, cry profusely, ramble, retreat in silence, suffer brain fog, or otherwise temporarily fall apart.
That was yesterday for you. Not yesterday. Was it 2 days ago?
2 days ago. Yep. I was like,
a couple hours. I'm like, is she going to be okay?
Yeah. I'm just like, I'm in my bed and I'm throwing the covers over me and everybody else can go to hell because I'm having a breakdown.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really interesting. So if you're wondering which side you favor, now I can be the other side too. I've seen myself in that position too. But I thought that was interesting. So, maybe I'm just overvaluing my own experience, but I figured the TP types out there would probably want to hear that.
Yeah, if you have this process higher up, let us know. Mm-hmm. Do you have any Antonia story of complete mental fog, breakdown, feeling bad, all of that? Yeah. So what's coming up for you as you're listening along, whether this is one of your preferred functions, introverted thinking or accuracy, both of its flavors, analytic or holistic, or extroverted thinking, effectiveness, analytic, holistic. So effectiveness is used by all TJs as a preferred function. Accuracy is used by all TPs as a preferred function, but everybody has both of these functions in them. It's just a matter of where it is, how sophisticated it is, how certain of it are you in using it in your life. So just take that into account, that we all have this showing up for us. And which, if you tuned into yourself right now, which of these energies do you think for each of these functions would you see more? Do you think you're more holistic or analytic on each of these functions, no matter where it falls? Come over to personalityhacker.com. Directly below this episode, leave a comment, ask a question. More importantly, share your story. Stories are compressed experiences. They really give us a sense of where you're coming from. You might be able to tell a story about the function in your life on how it was analytic and now it's holistic or vice versa. And we can get a sense of really how that's showing up for you through the story that you tell. So come over to personalityhacker.com and make your voice heard.
Yeah. And we mentioned this on the previous podcast, but I don't think we've really reiterated or landed it. So I just want to once more make the recommendation to pick up a copy of Dr. Dario Nardi's book, Decode Your Personality, 64 Brain-Based Subtypes to Go Beyond Myers-Briggs.
Yep.
You can get it on Amazon and also his personal publishing house, Radiance House.
Yeah.
And so, pick up a copy of Decode Your Personality. It's good stuff. Where he talks about not only the analytic and holistic versions of each function, but also the subtypes, the 64 subtypes that end up being birthed by them.
We'll need to put the link in the description.
Yep. All right. And also, if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. You might be watching us in YouTube right now. You can subscribe, and hit the bell to get notifications of future episodes. That's how it works, right? And also, every Sunday, we do a premiere of the episode. So please come join us on Sunday. And also, you can join us in our quests. Quests are when we gather around. I'm not going to do it. Last time we talked about the analytic version of extroverted intuition or exploration, which is the marketer one. So I'm going to be too holistic here, but I'm going to try to.
You want me to try it, or do you want to do it? Are you good? No, go ahead. Keep going.
Okay.
I want to hear this.
I'm trying. I'm
not judging you. I'm genuinely hearing it.
All right. So if I was going to be more analytic like you, I would be more assertive about it. And so I'd say, okay, join us on Sundays for our personality.
Currently, they're Sundays. They might change in the future, but right now, at the time of this recording, they're on Sundays. Once a week, we gather.
Okay, but you can't derail me.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
See, I'm getting too analytic. I'm directing too much.
Maybe I don't have analytic extroverted intuition, Joel, because
I'll be quiet.
Because I don't have the space for it.
That's probably true.
What do you think about that?
Continue. I'll try to be quiet.
Bucko.
I'll take a drink of my tea.
Okay. So, all right. Where was I at? Okay. So I want you to join us for personality quests right now at the time of this recording every Sunday, where we gather together to watch the premiere of this podcast. And then afterwards, we go into conversation, answer questions, do breakouts, and do journal prompts that help you make this content come alive for you in your life. We don't want personality to just be a conversation. We don't want it to just be arguments or refinements. We would love it to be alive in your life. And so you can use these principles to make changes and to become the most you can be in a single lifetime. So head over to personalityhacker.com/quests and check out or discover how you can be a part of this program. It's a membership. We do it every Sunday at the time of this recording, and you would be a lovely addition to the group that is already assembling every week. So come join us on our quests.
And you're going to love it. It's going to be fantastic.
Well, I didn't do
it. You're going to resonate with. No, I think you did great. I'm not going to keep going. I'm just going to say you're going to love it. I'm adding to it.
Okay.
To affirm what you did, because I think it was great. You did a good job.
Did I do analytic?
Yeah, okay. You did great. It was good. I mean, it wasn't how I would do it, but you did good for, it's, maybe I'm not doing a good job. Maybe this is better. Maybe this is more appealing to somebody listening to it.
All right, I'll keep going. I'll keep trying.
Yeah, keep trying, but we got to wrap this up.
Not right now, but I'm going to keep trying to be more analytic, extroverted intuition.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll see you either on the quest next for the discussion and the live experience that's coming up, or we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.